Okay, I'm going to work through some of these so that you can see how to do them. I'll do the first one in each row, and then you're to go back and do the rest of them for your assignment. First, we're going to start where a is 1. That means we don't have a coefficient in front of the x squared, and we have positive numbers for b and c. When it's a perfect trinomial, we can just go straight to our binomial squared. And the way we know it's a perfect square trinomial is if our c is a perfect square. Okay, the square root of 4 is 2. And if I can double that and get the middle, and 2 times 2 is 4. That number is going to go inside my parentheses, and I'm going to square it. Now, if we don't have a perfect square, I know I'm going to need 2 parentheses. And I need the c is in front. And I need 2 numbers that multiply to be 36 and add to be 13. And I start by naming ordered pairs for 36. I start with 1, 2 times 18, 3 times 12, 4 times 9, 5 doesn't go into 36, and 6 times 6. And I look to see, I kind of like to start at the bottom of the list. And if I use 6 and 6, that does not add up to 13. So it's not that. But 9 and 4 do add to 13. So those are my 2 numbers. Those are my winners. And I just factored that. If you have a GCF, that needs to be taken care of first. And a GCF is a greatest common factor. And so we always should be looking to see if there's something we can factor out. And in here, I have a v in both of these. So I can take a v out. And basically what you're doing when you take the v out is you're dividing everything by v. So v squared divided by v, and remember 2 minus 1 is 1, so that's v. 6v divided by v, the v's are going to cancel, and it's just plus 6. Now, if you've done it correctly, you can go back and say v times v is v squared, and v times 6 is 6v. Just make sure you box your answer so your teacher knows that you know which one it is. Okay, now we're going to do ones where our b is negative. And again, if it's a perfect square trinomial, and actually I'm going to go to 2 to start with on this one. If it's a perfect square trinomial, then the square root of the 49 should work. And those have to add to be the middle. Since this is a negative, though, this has to be a negative, because negative 7 plus negative 7 gives me the negative 14. And so then that can be written as x minus 7 squared. Okay, they multiply to be 49, but they add to be the negative 14. Here, I have not a perfect square, so I'm going to need 2 parentheses. And I have x at the beginning. And this time I need numbers that multiply to 56 and add to be negative 15. Now, since my c is positive, that means I need 2 negative numbers in order to add to a negative number and multiply to a positive number. But let's do factor pairs of 56. I have 1 and 56. I have 2 and 28. 3 doesn't go into it. I have 4 and... Sorry, I had to pause for just a minute. I had to sneeze. Okay, so I have 4 and 14. 5 doesn't go into it. 6 doesn't go into it. And then we have 7 and 8. So I need 2 that add to negative 15. 7 and 8 add to 15. And if I put a negative in front of them, that's negative 15. So negative 7 times negative 8 will give me a positive 56, because 2 negatives multiply to be a positive. And negative 7 times negative 8 gives me a negative 15. Next, we have a difference of squares. And one way you can do this is to go v squared. We don't have a b, so I could give it a b and just make it 0 minus 4. And I need 2 numbers that are going to multiply to be negative 4 and add to be 0. In order to multiply to be negative 4, one has to be positive and one has to be negative. Right? All the others that we've done so far, they've had to multiply to a positive number, so they were both negative or both positive. But if they're multiplying to a negative number, one has to be negative and one has to be positive. And my factor pairs of 4 are 1 and 4 and 2 and 2. And sure enough, 2 and 2 multiply, negative 2 times positive 2 multiplies to be negative 4 and adds to be 0. So that's my answer there. Okay, and that leads us right into C being negative. Remember that if we have C being negative, that means that one of my signs is positive and one's negative. Now I'm going to go to an end at the beginning of both of these. And I need factor pairs that add up to -2 multiply to 1. And keep in mind, one would be positive and one would be negative. Well, the only two factors of 2 that I have are 1 and 2. And in order for those to add to be a positive 1, the 1 has to be negative and the 2 has to be positive. That'll, and -2 times 1 is -2. -1 times 1 is negative, but when we add the positive, it makes it +1. Okay. Here's a reminder of our GCF. You have to look to see if there's something that goes into all of those. They're all even numbers, so I can factor out a 2. So if I divide each of these by 2, I'm going to take the 2 out. I'm left with x squared plus x minus 72. And now I look at that and see if I can factor this. Okay, the 2 is still going to be part of my factors. And then I'm going to have 2 parentheses. I have x at the beginning, and I'm multiplying to 72, so I know that one's plus and one's minus. So I'm going to list my factors of 72. I've got 1 and 72, 2 and 36, 3 and 24, 4 and 18, 5, 6 and 12, and 8 and 9. Okay, start with the bottom. 8 and 9, multiplied by 72. If one's positive and one's negative, that will leave us with a 1x. And the bigger one has to be positive, so this will be +9 and -8. And that's your answer. Okay, this time we have something in front of the x. We have our a is not 1, it's a number. And so we got to look at how we do that. Again, what we're going to do is we're going to set up 2 parentheses. Okay, and I need factors of 7, or 1 and 7. Those are the only factors of 7 I have. My factors of 6 are 1 and 6, and 2 and 3. And I have to have some combination where if I multiply the inside ones and I multiply the outside ones, that they add to be the middle up top. So let's start with put my 7x here and an x here. I know that these are both going to be positive because it multiplies to be a positive, and my middle is a positive. So there's a plus and a plus. So now I got to figure out what factors of 6 will go with that. If I do 6 and 1, that gives me a 1x here and a 42x here. That's way too big. That's not going to work. So I got to put that away. So 6 and 1 is not going to work. What if I went 6 and 1 this way? I'd have 6x and 7x. That adds to 13. So that works. So I'm going to keep that. Okay, sometimes we have to take a GCF out first. What I notice about this one is that they're all even. A couple of them can be divided by 4, but 10 can't. So I'm going to take the 2 out. So I'm dividing everything by 2. So I have 5c squared plus, what am I doing? Okay, 5c squared plus 28c plus 2 divided by that is 32. So I need numbers that are going to multiply to be, well, we're going to try and factor this. So I need my factors of 5 and 32. For 5, I have 1 and 5. For 32, I have 1 and 32. 2 and 16. 3 does not go into it. 4 and 8. 5 doesn't go into it. 6 doesn't go into it. 7, and we're back at 8. So those are all the factors. Since 1 and 5 are the only things I can have for C, I can just make 1, 5, and 1, 1. And since it multiplies to be positive, and this is positive, I know these are both plus. Okay, I start at the bottom to start to figure things out. If I use a 4 and an 8, let's see what that looks like. That would give me a 4C in the middle, and a 40C, that's too big. That's not going to work. Okay, and before I move on, I'm going to trade them and see if trading them works. So I have an 8 and a 4. That gives me 8c here and 20c here. That works. So I don't have to go any further. So I have 5c plus 8 times 4c plus 4, or times c plus 4. Okay. So on these two that I just did, both were positive because they multiplied to be a positive and they added to be a positive in the middle. This time they're multiplying to be a positive, so I know I have two of the same sign, but this time my b is negative, so that means they're both going to be negative. My factors of 3 are 1 and 3. My factors of 72 are 1 and 72, 2 and 36, 3 and 24, 4 and 18, 6 and 12, and 8 and 9. There's a whole bunch of those. But I only have these two for my x. So I'm going to do 3x and x. I know they're both going to be minus because they're multiplying to be positive and they add to be negative. And then I need numbers that multiply to be 35. I always like to start at the bottom. If I do an 8 here and a 9 here, that gives me 8x and 27x. 8 and 27 is 35. I got it right off the bat. Well, that's kind of odd. So there's my answer. Because I have a negative 8x on the inside, a negative 27, and negative 8 and negative 27 matches my middle. Okay, on this one, we're going to factor something out first. I'm going to factor out, let's see if I can factor out a 4. If I take out a 4, that means I'm dividing everything by 4. So that leaves me with 5v squared minus 42v plus 16. That works. Okay. Oh, did I forget something up there? I did forget something up here. Don't forget, when you factor out a 2, the greatest common factor, that's got to be part of your answer. Okay, I did okay here. Okay, but make sure that when you factor out a greatest common factor, it's part of your answer. So I'm going to go ahead and put it down here with my 2 parentheses. And I know they're both going to be minus because it multiplies to be positive and it adds to be negative. I know that 5 and 1 are the only factors I have for 5. So one of these has to be 5 and one of those has to be 1. And then for 16, I have 1 and 16, 2 and 8, 3, 4 and 4. Okay, so let's start with 4 and 4 and see how that works. I have 4 and 4. So that means I have 4 on the inside and 20 on the outside. That's only 24. I need 42. So I'm definitely need something bigger. So let's try the 8 and the 2. That gives me 8 here and 10 here. That's only 18. Let's see what happens if we switch the 8 and the 2. That gives me 40 out here and 2 in here. That works. That's 42. So that's going to be my answer. And remember, I have I factored out as part of it as well. Okay. Up till now, it's been pretty straightforward with 2 of the same signs, except for when we had difference of squares. We're going to talk now about when c is negative. Okay. We're going to get my 2 signs set up. I know my factors of 2 are 1 and 2. My factors of 3 are 1 and 3. I know one of these has to be plus and one has to be minus. The reason for that is my c is negative, and the only way you can get a negative with 2 numbers is for one to be plus and one to be minus. So let's just start by trying with, I'm going to make these just a little bit bigger, 2x and x. And I'll start with plus here and minus here. If I do a 3 here and a 1 here, that gives me a 1x in the middle and a minus 6 out there. Minus 6 and 1 is minus 5. That's not going to work. Let's see if it works if I twist these around. What if I have 3 and 1? That gives me a 3x in the middle and a minus 2x. Well, I'm getting closer because that's a positive 1. I need a negative 1. So what if I flipped my signs? Right? Because that gives me a negative 3x and a positive 2x, and that gives me the negative 1 that I need in the middle. So this one works. Okay, we're going to factor out a common factor again. I'm going to factor out a 4. We're not going to forget it this time. Divide everything by 4. And I get 3k squared plus 16k minus, whoop, 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 whoop. Let's see, minus 32. Yeah, 35. 35. Okay. Okay, my factors of 3 are 1 and 3. My factors of 35 are 1 and 35. 2 doesn't go, 3 doesn't go, 4 doesn't go, 5 and 7. That's it. And I know that I'm going to have 1 plus and 1 minus. I know the 4 is still going to stay out here, the thing that I factored out. And I'm going to start with the 3k here and the k here. So let's try with 5 and 7. If I do 7 here and 5 here, that gives me 5 on the inside and 21 on the outside. And negative 21 and 5 is a negative 16. Okay, right combination, wrong sign, so let's switch our signs. I make this negative and this positive. That gives me a negative 5 and a positive 21, which gives me my middle. We know that this works. Okay, this time the A term has more than one factor. So I've got 1 and 4 and 2 and 2 for my A. And then I've got 1 and 27 and 3 and 9 for my C. Now the good news is I know they're both positive, like that. And I'm going to start with everything on the bottom. I'm going to do 2k and 2k and 3 and 9. And we're just going to see where that takes us. Okay, so that gives me 6 here and 18 here. And 6 and 18 is 24. So that worked out right away. You're going to find a lot of luck if you start with the bottom numbers when you're doing the factor pairs. It tends to work out quite a bit. So that's a nice little helpful hint you get for listening to the end. Okay, difference of squares. So I have 4c squared. I'm going to put a 0c in there for b and minus 1. So my factors of 1 are 1 and 1. My factors of 4 are 1 and 4 and 2 and 2. So I'm going to have 2 parentheses. I know that the end is 1 because that's all I got. One's going to be plus and one's going to be minus. And I'm going to start with the bottom. If I put a 2c here and a 2c here, that gives me positive 2 on the inside, negative 2 on the outside, which goes to 0. So I've got my answer. And we're done. Okay, so I've done a lot there for you. You've got an example of everything you need to do. So now it's time to go forth and finish your worksheet and have it done for when Mrs. Underwood and I are back on Tuesday. Thanks.